From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. Street protest in Ukraine led Parliament to remove President Viktor Yanukovych last month. Parliament ordered him sent to the International Criminal Court to be tried for what it called serious crimes. The political crisis has hurt Ukraine's economy, which has struggled since 2009. Ukraine is a large country with 44 million citizens. Acting President Oleksandr Turchinov said in late February that the economy is growing weaker. He said the country will soon need money to pay its debts. Ukraine's finance ministry said it needs $35 billion to survive this year and in 2015. The economic problems worsened during the protests that led to the ouster of Mr. Yanukovych. The European Union and the United States have expressed concern and a willingness to help. The EU has said it would be ready for talks with Ukraine after it holds elections set for May. Western nations have suggested that the country seek loans from the International Monetary Fund. Art Dernev is a professor of finance at the University of Iowa. He has closely followed developments in Ukraine. He says the country is in financial trouble because of corruption under the former president. Mr. Yanukovych rejected agreements with the EU. Instead, Ukraine accepted a promise of aid from Russia. But since his ouster, Russia has announced it plans to delay the assistance. Ukraine's economy has depended on low-cost natural gas from Russia. Now, those gas supplies are threatened. Acting President Turchinov has said Ukraine must return to the family of European countries, but he also noted the importance of his country's relations with Russia. For VOA Learning English, I'm Laurel Bowman. From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. Many people who want to buy goods, pay for services, or send money anywhere in the world are using Bitcoin. They do not have to use banks or credit cards when they use the electronic money. Bitcoin is not issued by governments, yet it is bought, sold, and exchanged like other currencies through trading companies. Bitcoin is electronically protected or encrypted. Jerry Brito is a technology policy analyst at George Mason University. He says Bitcoin is the world's first true digital currency that is not controlled by anyone. However, the very things that people like about the digital currency are also what criminals like about it. They want to move money from place to place secretly, without governments knowing about it. Law enforcement agencies in the United States recently closed an online market that used Bitcoin. Marco Santori is the chairman of the Bitcoin Foundation's Regulatory Affairs Committee. He notes that all Bitcoin deals can be seen by all other computers. He says Bitcoin is regulated. He says the Bank Secrecy Act regulates those who exchange bitcoins for other digital currencies or for dollars. The amount of Bitcoin in the system must always be counted and tracked. The United States, Germany, and many other governments accept the use of Bitcoins. Some officials have called for stronger regulations. China recently banned its banks, but not businesses, from trading in Bitcoin. The value of a Bitcoin has increased since the digital currency began in 2009. It has gone from being worth just a few pennies to being valued at hundreds of American dollars. For VOA Learning English, I'm Laurel Bowman.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. In Manila and other cities in Asia, people are building office and apartment buildings. But building roads, railways, and other important infrastructure has been slower, partly because of the 1997 financial crisis. After that crisis, developing Asian countries reduced the amount they spend on infrastructure. In May, Philippines President Benigno Aquino III approved $1.4 billion in spending for commuter trains in Manila and other projects. That brought the total for infrastructure investment to $31.8 billion since 2010. In India, the biggest program is the $100 billion Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor project. It will create 7 industrial cities, high-speed railways, 6 airports, and 3 seaports. The government says India also needs 450 new coal power plants. In Vietnam, the government approved plans for a new airport near Ho Chi Minh City. It will cost $15.8 billion. Vietnam also plans to spend $22.5 billion on new highways. The demand for power in that country increases by 10% every year. State media say Vietnam needs to spend $125 billion in the next 20 years to keep up with the demand. Thailand has a $92 billion building plan for the next few years. The plan includes high-speed train routes that will run from China in the north through Malaysia and Singapore to the south. It calls for expanding seaports and commuter trains in Bangkok. The Asian Development Bank has estimated that developing Asian economies need to invest $8 trillion by 2020. For VOA Learning English, I'm Jonathan Evans. From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. China is looking to stop low-cost vacation tours that force tourists into costly stores. The tourists buy the tours at reduced prices, but then they are expected to make costly purchases at stores while on the trip. The stores then give money back to the travel company that sold the low-cost trip. Sometimes these agreements lead to conflict between tour guides and tourists. China's National Tourism Administration says it is looking at possible fines for tourists that buy the discounted trips. In the past, China has fined the travel companies that offer the trips. But that action did not reduce the number of tourists tricked into going to expensive shops. The Chinese tourism officials say they hope that fining tourists will stop this kind of discounted travel. The new plan follows the recent death of a 54-year-old tourist in Hong Kong. Chinese officials said the man from mainland China was beaten near a jewelry store last week. He reportedly died of a heart attack he suffered during the beating. The reports also said the tourist was trying to stop a fight between tourists and tour guides. The guides reportedly were angered when the tourist refused to make purchases at the jewelry store. In many countries, including the United States, tour buses commonly stop at souvenir shops and gift stores. These shops mainly market to visitors. The goods for sale are often overpriced and of poor quality. For VOA Learning English, I'm Jonathan Evans. From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. The Senate recently passed a measure meant to ease passage of trade legislation. The bill will affect approval of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP, which involves 12 nations around the Pacific Ocean. But a sharp disagreement over freshwater catfish has hurt the trade negotiations in the U.S. Senate. Farm-raised catfish is a local U.S. industry valued at less than $1 billion in yearly production. The Senate dispute arose when Republican lawmaker John McCain criticized a measure calling for increased U.S. government inspections of Asian catfish. He said the true purpose of the catfish program is to protect a small handful of catfish farmers in the South. McCain called the measure a protectionist program. 7 years ago, the U.S. Department of Agriculture was ordered to establish and administer a new catfish inspection plan. 10 Asian Pacific nations have sent letters warning that this issue is hurting TPP negotiations. At least one nation, Vietnam, has threatened trade retaliation. Senator Roger Wicker represents the state of Mississippi, one of America's biggest catfish producers. He says the real issue is not protectionism, but the health of American consumers. He says this is about food safety. Senator Wicker says Asian-produced seafood has been found to have higher levels of chemicals and other harmful substances. The strong debate is just one of the barriers to completing the 12-nation free trade agreement. Each country has its own interest to protect. For VOA Learning English, I'm Jonathan Evans.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. Recent discoveries of mineral wealth in Kenya could help add to East Africa's biggest economy. The government also is taking steps to improve the openness of the mining industry. But some citizens are concerned that at least one newly announced mining project will damage local communities. The government has warned companies about making announcements about new resources before they are confirmed. Kenya's Secretary of Mining, Najib Balala, says the government will ask mining companies for details about their findings 21 days before making them public. The discoveries also could upset some communities where big mining projects are planned. One example is the recent discovery of rare minerals in the Marima Hills in the coastal area of Kwale. The mining company Cortec reported finding a deposit of more than 600 kilograms of niobium. The element is used in making steel and metal mixtures called superconducting alloys that allow electric currents to travel very easily. Cortec says the discovery could be worth $50 billion. But a dispute has begun between the company, the government, and the local community. Leaders of the Minjakenda ethnic group, which lives near Kenya's coast, say they practice their religion in the Marima Hills. The Kenyan government has not announced how payments it receives from mining companies, called royalties, would be used. The mining secretary is expected to present legislation proposing that the central government take 70% of mining royalties. Local governments would receive 25%, and local communities would receive 5%. For VOA Learning English, I'm Carolyn Pursuti.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. The political crisis in Ukraine has forced many European nations to reconsider their dependence on Russia for energy. Some nations are looking at new ways to recover natural gas at home. These methods include a disputed process known as hydraulic fracturing, or fracking. The process involves the use of liquid chemicals to break rock. Experts believe Europe might have trillions of cubic meters of shale gas. Shale is a kind of gas-bearing rock. France, Poland, and Ukraine are thought to have the largest amounts of shale gas. Large supplies have been found in Romania, Bulgaria, and the United Kingdom. Lucia Seibert is with the Wilson Center in Washington. She says large shale gas reserves and political problems in Ukraine
have increased interest in Europe's shale gas. But Europe is believed to be years away from major shale gas production. Poland, the United Kingdom, and Romania are expected to start exploration by 2020. Removing shale gas through hydraulic fracking is the subject of often intense debate. Most drilling areas in Europe are near populated areas, and environmental groups have raised concerns about water and air pollution from fracking. Much of Europe's gas flows through a pipeline from Russia across Ukraine. But Ukraine has had difficulty paying Russia's Gazprom energy company. And early this year, Ukrainian protesters ousted the country's pro-Russia president. The new government signed economic agreements with the European Union over Russian objections. Now, Russia has signaled it may cut off gas to Ukraine and to much of Europe. For VOA Learning English, I'm Carla Babb.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. A new report says income inequality is hurting the potential for growth around the world. It says the best way to deal with the inequality is by helping poor people and the middle class. The report is based on an International Monetary Fund study. Opinions about income inequality are not hard to find. Many people are concerned about the issue. Kalpana Kochar is the Deputy Director of the Strategy, Policy and Review Department at the IMF. Recently, she said, the gap between the rich and the poor is at the highest level in decades in advanced countries. And inequality is also rising in major emerging markets. The new report is called Causes and Consequences of Income Inequality, a Global Perspective. Ms. Kochar said, inequality trends have been mixed in emerging markets and developing countries. Some countries are experiencing falling inequality rates. However, inequality in education, healthcare, and finance remain in areas such as Latin America, Middle East, and Africa. The report suggested that policymakers direct their attention on the poor and middle class to create economic growth. The organizers of the study found that a 1% increase in the earnings of the richest 20% of people led to a nearly 1% decrease in GDP growth over a 5-year period. A similar increase in the income share of the poorest 20%, the study found, led to more than a 1/3% increase in GDP. Kalpana Kochar said that is a fairly powerful message for policymakers and researchers around the world. For VOA Learning English, I'm Carolyn Persutti.